There is a power in reclaiming the intentionality of your life. There's a power in deciding you can create the ecosystem. And by creating the ecosystem, you could choose, let's say I've decided, okay, I'm going to reflect on my personal culture. And I've decided that my personal culture is going to be exactly like the culture I was told to live my whole life. Perfect. You could choose, okay, actually, my personal culture is nothing like the way I grew up. I'm actually going to change X, Y, and Z patterns that I was taught. I'm going to express myself in X, Y, and Z way. And so by identifying personal culture as something that you create for yourself, an ecosystem you create for your life, you give yourself back the power over your life and you get to be in the driver's seat of who you are and who you decide to become.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to A Media Moment, a podcast exploring the journey to finding and owning your voice. I am your host, Ehis, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Leeah Marie Derenoncourt. Leeah is a storyteller and communication strategist who helps leaders and organizations share messages that inspire action. She works at Original Strategies, a public affairs and communications firm in Washington, D.C., and she's also hosts her own podcast called Expressions, where she talks with guests from a diverse set of backgrounds about the different ways that people share culture. In this episode, we'll explore the idea of personal culture, what it means, how it can be built, why it matters, and how it can impact your career. Leeah, welcome to the show.
Hello, so happy to be here.
Excited to have you. So let's start with your story. Could you tell us about your background growing up and how that shaped and impacted your voice?
Absolutely. So I come from a bit of a unique background. My parents are both originally from Haiti, but my mom was born and raised in the US. My dad was born and raised in Haiti. So from the get-go, I felt like I had a foot in both worlds. To make things even more confusing, we've lived in 5 countries over the course of my life. We lived in Haiti, Tanzania, Zambia, and the Philippines before moving to the US. And then since I've been in adulthood, I've had the amazing opportunity to live in Colombia and split time between the US and Santiago de Chile. So really from the get-go, from the foundation, I have been with a foot in different international spheres, different countries, different cultures, talking to different people. And that had 2 effects on me. One, when I was younger, it was like, oh my God, there's so much world out here. I don't know what my place is within that. I don't know how to speak up within that. But as I got older, it's become this journey of figuring out, okay, what is my space within that? Learning that we're also much more similar than we think we are, but also our differences are what make us special. Learning that no culture has, precedence over another. And all of that has really cemented itself into my philosophy and my championing of the idea of personal culture, the idea of that you can build your own culture, as well as my general arc as a storyteller, as someone who wants to tell the stories of all the different things that are out there, all the different worlds that exist within our one.
That's awesome. So can you tell us why you guys moved around so much? And this is different places. It's not like, oh, you went to Canada, Mexico, and the US, like places in Africa, the Philippines, like very, very diverse places. Like what took you guys to those different countries?
So my parents both worked at the time in international public health. And so through that, they were on the ground helping different communities with their public health work. And that moved us around a ton. Through that, I developed a really strong love of travel. So then, I don't work in public health. I want to see as much of the world as I can. And I set out to do that. But I joked once that I'm a Nepo baby for travel, and not in the sense that my travels were in any way paid for, but in more of the sense that I have a very, very strong privilege of being able to go to my parents and say, hey, I want to go here. I want to go to this country. And they go, okay, figure out how to go there, but go. And I never faced, don't go or stay here. And I find that to be, it's I think, a very strong privilege, and one that I like to acknowledge, but also one that I hope to pass, like to give people permission to live the lives they want to, regardless of who they are or where they come from.
I'm a little bit jealous. I was born and raised in Nigeria. I lived in Nigeria. I moved here at 17, and literally these are my 2 homes, 2 places I've lived significantly. I mean, I've occasionally traveled and visited places, but that's definitely not to the extent that you have. So in the early days, though, when you were growing up and moving around to these places, was it ever like, oh my God, we're in a new place now, so I got to go through all this process again until I feel settled?
Absolutely. It's funny you say you feel jealous of that moving around, because for me, I was always so jealous of the people who had roots. Because I was
That's
like,
like,
see, you mean you have the same friends like your whole life, and you have this community that knows you and loves you and cares for you? Care for me,
yeah,
but it was really so. My mom, for example, she born and raised in the US. She left the US when she was 24. She traveled, and then I was born and a lot of stuff happened. But for most of her childhood, for all of her childhood, she was in this not only in the same country but in the same state. She grew up in DC. And I meet her friends now that she met in elementary school, and I'm like, "Oh my God, I wish I had that." But, the
yeah,
grass is always greener. I definitely though faced it's hard because so much of what we take for of like how we decide who we are starts with the people around us. And when that continues to change, even once I moved to the US, I went to one school and then I went to another school that was about an hour away to go to a special program. The communities that I was in continued to shift. And so I had to, from a very young age, decide who I was instead of take who I was from the people around me, or just take pieces of who I was from different people, which we all do. But when you move so much, you find that you don't have the choice. So that was hard, but it's also, as I've gotten older, I've realized a foundational element of who I am and has prepared me to be adaptable, to be able to find my strength and find my voice in a lot of different ways.
you said something that's the theme of today, which is the choice. Like you said, you got to a point where you figured like it's a choice for you to choose what sort of culture to embrace. So I guess at what point did you decide like I can't just like let this thing happen to me? Like I have to take more of a driver's seat in terms of my own personal culture, or creating my own personal culture, and adapting maybe to different things from the various cultures that you've experienced growing up. In what point of your journey did you reach that realization?
I started doing it when I was very young, like maybe, let's say 10,
Oh
but
wow.
I didn't realize it until I was much older, maybe when I graduated college. And there was a point at which I had to stop and realize how much of myself that I was choosing because I wanted to and how much I was choosing because I felt like I had to. So when I graduated college, I have always had this dream. I was going to work in PR. I loved PR. I was a fan of Scandal and all of the stuff. PR does not look like that, by the way. But I knew I wanted to work at a big agency, a big corporate company in New York, have the
Madison
hustle.
Avenue? Is that New York?
Yep, absolutely. In New York, have the hustle, grind life. I put my head down. I wanted to work hard. I also wanted the glamorized hustle culture, the glamorized, like taking calls at 2 in the morning and then save up and then eventually travel. I always knew I wanted to travel, but I didn't think it was for me right now. And then as I got closer and closer to graduating college, I was like, wait, this means I actually have to do this. And I started to feel this anxiety around the future that I was building for myself. But I convinced myself, this is still what I want. It's what I wanted my whole life. I want this community. I want to be cosmopolitan. I want to be around all these people. But I was like, okay, let me see how I can take an alternate path. Like, let's see if I move up the travel a little bit. So I ended up applying for a Fulbright award because in my head, I could do the Fulbright and then go do the corporate life, and it was going to be a prestigious thing that people would look up to, and they would value my career journey still. And so I ended up applying for the Fulbright. I was selected as a semifinalist. I had a few months before I would find out in April. And in those few months, I was like, wait, all of a sudden I have no plan. I'm just waiting for the Fulbright to come through. I'm waiting for my future to start and a future that I want. And so I ended up getting the results of the Fulbright and finding out I didn't get in. I was crushed. It was like,
So you didn't have like plan A, plan B. That was like that's it at
oh,
that
I
point.
had the plan because
Oh,
I held myself to one standard. Because when I didn't get the Fulbright, I was like, now I have to go live the life I told myself I would live. Like, now I have to go to New York and go live this agency life. I'd done the internships, I'd done the work. And I realized, oh my God, I have to do this. I don't want to do this. And so I sat there and I was like, what do I do now? Because my plan B of the Fulbright didn't work out. So that means I had to go with my plan A, which is my dream, supposedly. And that was the moment. I remember the words that stuck in my head, or asking myself, what matters? What matters to me right now? And realizing, okay, this big city life that I want to live, it's a big part of who I am. I love New York. I love the big city life and I will live that at some point, but it's not what I want. It's what I was choosing for myself. Nobody was forcing me to go. I was choosing it for myself because I felt like I had to. So if I consider what matters to me, what can I choose for myself? Because I want to and I can. And so through that, I went through a journey of reflecting on, okay, what are the things I've chosen for myself throughout my life? What brought me joy in my childhood? And slowly but surely, the journey hasn't stopped of building the life that I wanted and choosing for me and not for the world around me.
So in a way, it sounds like that moment, it was a blessing to give you the time to pause and reflect. And because it's easy for people to always be thinking about the next thing, like, okay, I'm about to graduate. What's that next job? And then you get the job, maybe I need a promotion, and then sit down to think about what matters and is this job aligning to it? Situations force you to do that. But I think in your case, it's great that that happened early on, as opposed to working in those agencies for 10 years, getting burnt out, and now having to sit down and reevaluate what have I been doing with my life for the last 10 years? So I know we're sort of talking about culture, and I think you shared how you had your leg in these different cultures. In terms of just navigating high school or middle school, and I came here for college. I didn't have to go through all that stuff until college. But I just wondered how that experience was for you, navigating your different identities, and navigating, because high school, you're still thinking about what colleges I want to go to, and navigating, making those decisions. How did all of that stuff come together for you?
Yeah, it was a really interesting journey. So I came to the US around middle school age. When I first got here, I remember whenever somebody asked me about myself, I talked about all the countries I'd been to and all the things that I've experienced, and that was a huge part of my identity. But as I moved through middle school and moved through high school, I felt more and more American. I felt more and more disconnected from the places that I lived. At the same time, cultural references, I didn't get pop culture. I had no idea what was going on. Music. And it didn't help that like my parents, my mom listens to jazz, my dad listens to Haitian music. I wasn't hearing American popular music. That was a big thing for me. Just because of the world I grew up in, I was very insulated. Plus being outside of the cultural sphere of what not just what Americans were talking about, but what young people my
Yeah.
age were talking about. I knew what the older people were. I knew what, things back in the day. And so I always felt out of step and out of place. And it really led to me, especially through middle school and high school, getting quiet and really wanting to listen more than speak, not knowing the right thing to say. I found myself really immersing myself, adapting myself to whatever my friends around me or the people around me liked or wanted to do because I didn't know what that would be for myself because I had lost this cultural identity as I got older because I spent my younger years abroad. By the time I was 16, I was like, oh, I was a kid then. But that still was a huge part of my life versus I only had however many years in the US of being within the culture of my peers. So it was difficult. It was really hard, but it was definitely a journey that's formed me into who I am today. So I have to be grateful.
Was there in that time, maybe that time period, fast forward into college, was there any key moments for you, any sort of turning point moments, which I like to call unmeeting moments? Any one of those such moments during your journey where you realize the power in your voice and saying, hey, maybe before I used to do more of the listening, but I do think now I do have something worth sharing. And it was important to actually start sharing that. Was that, I guess, what part of your journey did that happen? And was there any specific events or stories that come to mind?
It was absolutely a specific event. I spent the beginning of college slowly starting to find my voice. But when I first started, I was still in that mindset of, okay, I'll just be the way the people around me are. For reference, it's going to date me, but COVID hit my freshman year of college. So I started college, I was in, and then COVID hit and I went home. And then I was home for 6 months. And I was like, God, I don't know what to do with myself. But what that also affected is study abroad. I had wanted to study abroad in the Netherlands in my school's program, but I couldn't because COVID had canceled it. So I was searching for other ways to study abroad. And later on, when it was safer, I ended up applying to a program called the Frederick Douglass Global Fellowship. In that program, you had to apply and they selected a group of 10 students. In my year, it was 20 students because it was 10 students from my year and the students from the year before who weren't able to go because of the pandemic. Students of color from all over the US, and they took us and they plopped us in Ireland for 4 weeks to follow in the footsteps of Frederick Douglass. And I learned so much on that trip, but beyond learning about Frederick Douglass, who I love, I was put in a room for 4 weeks with 20 students of color from all over the country with all different life experiences. And in that, I began to recognize the validity of my own life experience and understand that just because my life looked different doesn't mean it was better or worse than anybody else's. Also, the very act of being selected for the program, the way we had to apply was talk about ourselves, actually talk about finding our voice. And I just stepping back a bit, had studied Frederick Douglass when I was a kid in middle school. And that was how I got super into like historical speeches. And I was a bit of a nerd about that. So then I went and talked about that in this application. And eventually, that was recognized and I was brought in. And so that was my first exposure to like international travel on my own as an adult. I was 19, but an adult, and then being surrounded by this diversity of experiences of other students. It was the first time I recognized it. Just because I'm different doesn't mean I'm better or worse. And it's just because my voice sounds different. My life experiences are maybe not the same as the person sitting next to me doesn't mean that they're not valid, and I can't make impact with that and resonate with people.
Amen and amen to that. I think that's one of the goals for this show, that just because your voice might be different or just because your story might be different, it does not mean it's not valid, right? We all come from different backgrounds and we all have different strengths. When people see people who speak very polished or sound like the default, whatever the place you are in, just think, oh my God, like they must be smart, or they must be this. No, sometimes just maybe someone has practiced that thing over and over again and they just appear very good at that thing. Maybe it's speaking, maybe they're a financial wizard or something. They're just very good at something. It doesn't mean because you're not that thing that your life experience is not valid. And sometimes it takes people a while in their life journey to get to a point when they realize that. And then, you stop shrinking yourself and stop comparing yourself. So anyway, shout out to the Frederick, what do you call the program?
Frederick Douglass Global Fellowship.
Frederick Douglass Global Fellowship. So the focus today is personal culture, and I imagine a lot of people listening might be like, "What? What is personal culture?" So let's start to unpack that. But before we go into personal culture specifically, though, like just from your own perspective, what is culture to you?
Ooh, what a question. I love that you asked me this question because on my own podcast, I ask every guest, what is cultural expression to you? And I never get asked that question, so I never have to do my own answer. Culture for me,
But this is your chance.
culture for
Yeah.
me is the ecosystem of our societies. So, what does that look like? When you think about cultural expression, you think about the way the ecosystem of our societies manifests in each and every person's life or in our lives as a collective. You think art, music, but then you also think of the way we speak, the way we move, the way we hold a fork. Culture as an ecosystem can also be the systems with which our societies work. So you have individualistic, you have collective cultures. You have cultures where the systems move really quickly because they prioritize time. You have cultures where the system moves really slowly. So it is at the end of the day, the ecosystem of our society, and that can manifest itself in expression and also systems.
So this is like the 10,000 view. Like this is the very, very, very like broad view.
Yeah.
So let's break it down now to the individual level and enter personal culture. So what does it mean? And two, why does it matter?
As for what it means, similarly to culture at large, personal culture is the ecosystem of our lives. I've developed this philosophy that we have a culture that's been handed down to us, that our society is formed through choosing, through access, through connection, through history. That is how things are expressed and how systems are created. Then we can do that for ourselves. So your personal culture is made up of your values. It's made up of the choices that you make for your life. It's made up of your intentions, your goals. But then your personal culture also is made up of how you express yourself. My personal culture is that I want to wear this jean jacket today because I love jean jackets. Your personal culture might be that you prioritize going on walks every morning. Your personal culture is also what you take from that larger ecosystem. My personal culture is full of different elements of Haitian culture because that's where my family is from. But my personal culture is also full of different words from the different places that I've lived. So that personal culture is the ecosystem you create for your life. The reason that matters is that because of the world that we live in, our ecosystem can feel so magnetic, so massive. You're born into this world. People are telling you how to act, what to do, what to say. Our parents teach us how to walk, they teach us how to stand in the room. We think that there's one way of living life and is biological and good, a lot of who we are from the world around us. However, there is a power in reclaiming the intentionality of your life. There's a power in deciding you can create the ecosystem. And by creating the ecosystem, you could choose, let's say I decided, okay, I'm going to reflect on my personal culture. And I've decided that my personal culture is going to be exactly like the culture I was told to live my whole life. Perfect. You could choose, okay, actually, my personal culture is nothing like the way I grew up. I'm actually going to change X, Y, and Z patterns that I was taught. I'm going to express myself in X, Y, and Z way. And so by identifying personal culture as something that you create for yourself, an ecosystem you create for your life, you give yourself back the power over your life and you get to be in the driver's seat of who you are and who you decide to become.
I think that's what I really love about this concept. It's that sense of empowerment, like the intentionality. Like I am deciding, not what my parents just handed down to me and say, hey, you have to eat jollof rice for dinner. Maybe not. Maybe I want some spaghetti. But more seriously, though, I do think that, let's say you're an African who likes to listen to like country music, for example, or maybe you're from the South and you like to listen to like Irish music or something. And sometimes people don't understand it. People from the outside don't understand this things that doesn't seem to fit. And like this person who's from here, who's supposed to be doing this thing, but they're doing the other thing, right? And so it seems to me like this might be like a framework to explain it to not just to people outside, but to yourself. Because sometimes if you find yourself in spaces where you doubt yourself, like, I don't know, let's say like a country music concert, and African, I'll be like, oh my goodness, like what am I doing here? And this country music concert is like nobody like me here. But maybe this framing gives you confidence in that decision, like to say, hey, I am positively choosing this part of me, and here's why. And maybe when I'm at that concert, like I'm not questioning why I'm there. I know why I'm there, right? Is that a way to think about why this matters and why this might be important?
Absolutely. And it's not, it gives you the opportunity to just go to the country music concert and enjoy the music. But also, it's not just, instead of jollof rice, I want spaghetti. It's actually,
Yeah,
I'm not eating jollof rice because they told me I have to. I'm eating it because I want to,
true,
because it's delicious.
true,
Or
true.
it's because actually I don't like it that much. I don't know how, but I don't like it that much. But I know it's important to my family. And in my personal culture, my family comes first. So I'm going to eat this jollof rice. But you choose that. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you live an entirely individualistic life where it's me over anybody else. But if you're prioritizing the collective culture, if you come from a space that you prioritize what your family wants for you over what you want for yourself, then you're choosing to do that. That is the intentional choice you're making for your life.
It's awesome. So a lot of the listeners are going to be professionals in their early to mid career. So I want to make the connection to why this might be helpful in the work environment or in the professional context. Can you help make that connection? Like how we can take this not just from a personal life standpoint, but how this could potentially impact how we move in our careers.
Absolutely. Well, I know there's a big debate as to whether work-life balance is an actual thing or how you have work-life balance over work-life harmony. I don't have a strong take in that outside of your work is a part of your life. In the life that you're living, you spend a big chunk of it working. And so how you decide to build your ecosystem for your life, also how you decide to build an ecosystem for your work. And we hear the idea of personal culture actually undercuts a lot of the professional development advice that we're given. For example, you want to build a career that's intentional. So let's say you have a 5-year plan for you want to make VP at your company. What kind of personal culture do you have to build to be able to do that? Is making VP a big part of your personal culture? Is that something that you're choosing intentionally for yourself? Or would you be happy in your position now and you're choosing to stay where you are? So overall, the same way that you choose for your life, you choose for your career. Beyond that, there's also a lot of debate over, okay, we have the hustle culture, work 24/7, go far, start 5 startups. And then you have I log off at 5, my computer goes away, nobody talks to me. One or the other, there's lots of career development people who have lots of opinions. They could have the opinions. But the life that you choose is chosen by your personal culture, the ecosystem that you build for yourself. Let's say I don't want somebody who wants to build companies and do all these big things in a job that is, let's log off at 5, we're just doing what we have to do, and then we're going to go live our life. So even in the choice, it's not about one right ecosystem for you. It's not about one right career for you, but it's about knowing yourself well enough to choose, and not even getting to know yourself, but building who you are well enough to choose. When you go into that life, then your personal ecosystem changes, your personal culture changes. I'm going to log off at 5 p.m. What am I doing with the rest of that time? What is the personal culture I'm building for myself? Is it that I prioritize family? Is it that I prioritize my pets? Is it that I'm just, on my own? Is it that I'm engaging in hobbies? So it's building that. In this life, let's say, and there's a bunch in the between, there's lots of gray area, but for the sake of the binary, looking at the personal culture of the person who's building 5 companies. How are they showing up to work every day? How are they leading those companies? What's the personal culture? Because your personal culture affects the culture around you. So what personal culture are you bringing into the space? How do you interact with people? Do you speak with them like firmly? Are you kind? All of these things are choices for your life and choices for the way you're living and creating that ecosystem. So throughout your career, regardless of the path you choose for yourself, know that that path can be a choice. And it is impacted by the world around you. You have to take a certain job because you have to make a certain amount of money. Well, okay, within those circumstances, how am I going to build a personal culture that allows me to, let's say I took this job, I don't really like it, but I need to make the money. How do I implement hobbies to be able to balance that for myself? So really, it's the underlying philosophy of choice and the underlying philosophy of intention with whatever you're building.
As you sort of explained it to me, just some, correct me if I'm wrong, is another way to think about this is like your values. Because in the work context, for example, people would say like those decisions about like what's my 5 year plan or what should I stay in this job or should I get a job that pays me more? People would say, you know what, make the choice that aligns more with your values. Like, right? People frame it as like a value decision, like what aligns with your long term. So as I think about personal culture, is it the same? Is it similar? Is it different? It's like, okay, here's my values as a human being. And so I would let that help make the decision when it comes to the professional decisions. And if I have sort of personal culture over here, is it the same? Is it the same thing? How, is it different? Like your personal values and personal culture?
So your personal values are part of your personal culture and they fuel a lot of what you do. So your values they direct your action. But the key to
Mm.
personal culture is one, that 10,000 foot view, and two, the action. So I can have
Mm.
values of, let's say I really value my personal life. And in my career, I really value, having a personal life. Well, the value are understanding that and having that set. Your personal culture is okay, how am I turning that into action? So, how am I developing? Let's go back to expressions and systems. How am I developing systems that put that in place and taking that 9 to 5 job? I am, you know, creating hobbies. There's the difference between personal values and personal culture. Our values are part of how you think about the world, how you move through the world. Personal culture comes down to how you take the action and how you look at it from the 10,000 foot view. So my values are part of my ecosystem. So they're driving a lot of the intentionality between how I'm thinking about the world. And so then when I think about the ecosystem of my life, I think about my work, I think about my hobbies, I think about my family, I think about my friends. So how is that value of preserving my personal life going to translate throughout all of those things? And then how am I going to take action? Let's say I like painting and writing and reading, and I can do that because I implemented my values in my work life. My personal culture is not just that I have this value of preserving my peace, protecting my peace, but my personal culture is also that I'm a reader. I'm a painter. Even if I'm not the best painter in the world, I'm a painter. That's an identity that I've given myself. I am someone who likes to go on walks. So in my personal culture, the thing that's important to me is my work, but that takes a lower priority. And then my personal life. And within that are these different things that I'm building for myself. So you don't end up with, okay, I really like my personal life. I'm going to value that and protect my peace in my work and log off at 5 p.m. and you sit in your bed and you don't do anything because you haven't created a life for yourself.
So it sounds like it's the implementation. It's not. It's
It's
moving from
implement
just the values
absolutely.
and it's the action, like what we actually do on a day-to-day basis. I guess that's what culture actually means, right? It's like
Hmm.
culture expressions, like how we express those values, it's like how we put those values in life. So you were the first person who sort of put it in this framework for me, this like, in term, give it a name, personal culture. And you share a lot on LinkedIn and social media about personal culture and what it means to you. I wonder what type of reactions have you received from people who were just hearing about this concept for the first time? Did they be like, huh, what is this? How is it different from this? Like, what's the general feedback that you tend to receive from people who are hearing about this concept for the first time?
What I like about the idea of personal culture is that it's not something new. As you see, it pulls from values, it pulls from a lot of different things that we experience in our day to day life. It pulls from like personal branding, it's how personal culture manifests itself to the world. It pulls from the different philosophies that guide our lives. But for a lot of people, they haven't had the word to describe who they are. And personal culture creates this mindset refresh of I actually don't have to figure out, I don't have to spend my life figuring out, okay, who am I? Who's the real me? And instead, I'll spend my life building who is the person that I feel best as? What is the culture that I want to build for myself? In the same way that we build cultures in workplaces, in the same way we build them in societies. And so, because of that, people recognize a lot of themselves in personal culture and the idea of personal culture. I see a lot of people, a lot of Gen Z early career folks who had this idea of what my culture is, but then have the internet all over, like, okay, these are all the things I'm supposed to be. And then the workplace or the lack thereof, and figuring out, okay, I'm not a student, but I can't get my first job. So who am I in this in between? And they all look at this idea of personal culture instead of going, oh my God, I'm not a student anymore. Who can I be? Say, okay, I don't have to figure out who I am right now. I don't know. That's okay. Maybe I'll never know. But this is how I want to show up today. This is how I want my ecosystem to be today. And this is the action I'm going to take today. And so it puts the power back in their hands. And so I really feel that people resonate with that. And I'm really happy to have found a community on LinkedIn that really aligns with the ideas behind personal culture.
That's awesome. That it sounds like it's been generally positive feedback. My first reaction was like, "What?" I mean, that's part of why I wanted to bring you on the show to really like delve into it and get to learn, and not just I guess myself, but also help our listeners understand what the concept means. So you did mention personal brand not long ago in the explanation, because personal culture is about, like we mentioned, action and how do we translate those values into real life situations. And I kind of think about personal branding as one of those things, like how we show up online or show up in the workplace, the actual things that people see about us, whether it's colors people like or use, or the things you talk about, the types of things you share. So, what place is personal branding in the bigger scheme of things of personal culture?
Personal branding, I have to say personal culture is
Yeah.
how who you are, and personal branding is how you tell that story to the world.
Mm.
So when you think about personal branding being how you show up to the world, you need to show up as something. Personal culture is that something. The thing that makes it really different is that how I show up on this podcast is going to be different than the personal brand I build if I'm a teacher and I want to build a personal brand in the school and how people are perceiving me. Or if I'm showing up on LinkedIn as an AI expert, or if I'm showing up on a different, like on TikTok as an early career expert. And depending on the channel, depending on where I'm building for my audience, depending on who I'm talking to, all of those things will come into your personal brand. And your personal brand will draw from different elements of who you are to portray that to the world. But I'm not always going to show every part of my personal culture to every single person. I do think it's important for people to be able to build personal brands. And there's tons of people out there who are amazing at telling people how to break that down. But to build a personal brand at the foundation, you have to be building it from something personal. You have to be building it from who you are. And to know who you are or to decide who you are, you need to have a personal culture. And everybody has personal culture. It's just whether or not you're choosing it or not.
Okay, so let me try to explain it the way I kind of understood it. So personal branding is just sort of the outside portion of it, the external. It's like what
Mm-hmm.
people see. But obviously, like our lives, we have a lot of stuff that stays within us. So the personal culture piece would be like the full package, the inside and the outside and everything. And the personal branding would just be the part we choose to reveal or show.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be, it's not just that people, like people will see your personal culture.
True,
It's who you are and how you're showing up.
true, true.
Your
Yeah.
personal brand is how you decide to tell that story. Because I can position me moving around a bunch as a kid as something that created my foundation. It's why I'm a storyteller. I could also tell that story in a way that, actually my personal brand is all about helping people speak different languages. So then I would talk about my experience learning different languages in different places, and that would be my personal brand. It doesn't mean that the adaptability, the cultural shifting, all of that wasn't a part of my story and isn't a part of my personal culture today. But in the scenario, let's say I'm a language expert, the personal brand I want to show is that I learned these different languages and this is how I moved forward.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, just a couple more questions. So one, for someone who's hearing this conversation, hearing about this concept for the first time and thinking like, how can I implement this in my own life? So what's a small practical step someone can take to start developing or building your personal culture?
Personal culture starts with reflection because you can't make a choice about who you are unless you take an audit of what is going on in your life. I do this thing I'm calling orbit mapping, but it draws from Odyssey mapping, which from book Design Your Life by two Stanford professors, books that have a concept of reflecting on your life and writing it down. I don't say I originated this concept, but for me, I call it orbit mapping. This is how it works in my life. I sit down and what are the different things that make up my life today? For me right now, it's my work in my day job, my work outside of my day job, my family, my friends, travel. Travel is a big part of my life right now because that's something I've chosen for myself. It's not the life everybody wants to live. Then I take all these things and I write them down and how are each of these things showing up in my life? Is this something I chose for myself or is this something that just shows up in my life? The way my family shows up in my life, is that because I want them to show up that way? Or is it because, I don't, that's just the way they show up. And even if you can't control the actions of other people, how am I reacting to that? Is it the way I want to be reacting to that? Am I taking actions towards reacting the way I want to? Really going through and assessing every part of your life. And then the other half to that is thinking about the things that you want for your life. So in my ideal world, I show up as someone who is confident. Like not confident at doing something, not good at something, confident. Like I radiate confidence. What does that mean to me? How is that showing up in my work, in my family, etc.? And really seeing how you can take a step today. It doesn't need to be, I don't need to be standing on stages, next week, but maybe
Give it a
today
TED Talk, for example.
yeah, exactly. I don't need to start with a TED Talk, but I can start by saying hi to somebody in the coffee shop. And even though I'm nervous and scared, start with that reflection. For me, it's writing it down. For other people, it's talking into an audio, a voice note, recording themselves talking. Go through each part of your life, assess it. How is it showing up? And what's one tiny step you can take today to show up the way you want to build the ecosystem that you want.
All right, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And besides just personal culture, in life in general, I find having time to reflect, what are you? People do journals. I don't personally do that a lot enough, but like any chance you get to like sit down, try to take stock of what's going on in your life, I find it's just very helpful to be able to process and to think, okay, this is what, no, this went this way because of this, and maybe this is what I can change, even a tiny bit tomorrow, and maybe get a better outcome. So thank you for being here and thank you for teaching us about personal culture today. But always my final question, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
So when I lived in New York briefly, I lived with this woman. She was a powerhouse. She's a hairdresser in New York. And she's the type of person that if I didn't need a random roommate, I never would have interacted with her. She was a really strong look into how somebody whose culture is so different from your own can impact you in a really strong way. She sat me down one night when I was really stressed and we sat on the couch and she looks at me and she goes, every decision you make in life is made out of love or fear. Choose love. But it really applies to everything in life because in everything in life, you're either moving towards something or away from something. So if I want something, I need to be going towards it because I want it, not because I'm afraid that if I don't go towards it, something bad is going to happen. If I'm choosing a job, I need to be choosing that job because I want this job for the money, I want this job to learn, etc. I don't want to choose this job because I'm afraid if I don't choose this job, I'm never going to get a job and I'm going to live a really hard life. If I'm choosing a person in my life to be a friend, I'm choosing them to be my friend because I really value them and their opinions, not because if I don't choose them to be my friend, maybe I'll never have friends and I'll die alone. So from everything to choosing what you want to eat versus what you want to do with your career, how you want to build your life, moving from a place of love and a place of moving towards something rather than a place of fear really cements a foundation of intentionality in your life but also building a life that you really want.
That's a great place to end. So thank you, Leah. I really appreciate the time today and taking us through the concept of personal culture and teaching us how you built it for yourself. And I hope people can get away from this conversation and what that means for them and start thinking about what that means for them and how they can put that into real life and to implement it. So again, as I mentioned at the top, Leah has a podcast called Expressions. I'm going to have links in the show notes, so please check that out. Again, thanks for coming to the show, Leah, and thanks, listeners. Thanks for listening. I am Ehis, as always, and until next time, stay unmuted.